Thanks very much. It's great to be here and with live people, as well as those of you at home and in your offices. So to start off, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be presenting a little snapshot from the results of the State of Heritage Review carried out by Heritage Council a couple of years ago. And I should mention that I'm honored to be in the presence of the principal author of that report, Dr. Cale Leskovich, who is here today. He's with the City of Bendigo, so he can correct me if I get anything wrong. I should also mention that I was originally going to be joined by a colleague of mine at the Heritage Council's Secretariat, Michelle Glynn. Unfortunately, she's in bed with COVID, so I wish her a speedy return, and I will cover her material in any case. So, just probably all of you have heard of the Heritage Council of Victoria, but in case you're asking yourself, oh, what is that they do again? I'll give you a little refresher. So we're an independent state statutory body that operates under the Victorian Heritage Council Act, and we have 10 members and 10 alternates, and the members represent fields such as conservation architecture, archaeology, there are historians, engineers, and builders, specialists in heritage law and planning. There's also a Heritage Council member and alternate who are nominated by the National Trust. I'm the member for that. And we also have members and alternates from Aboriginal communities who have knowledge of or experience in cultural heritage. If you're familiar with the Heritage Council already, it's likely to be in relation to our decision-making powers, which are to put places into the Victorian Heritage Register and also deciding on conflicts in relation to heritage permits. But you might be less aware of our work in a more broader sense of supporting heritage conservation and heritage theory, such as the project I'm going to speak about today. So to start out, we might ask a really big picture question. Why should we be protecting heritage? Why should we bother? And why should municipal councils be involved in it? I'd say that the most important reason is because it's expected by the communities, all of our communities. There was a survey of Australia-wide, generally, in 2006, and it found that 95% of Australians agreed with the statement, "It is important to keep historic features wherever possible when trying to improve towns and cities." So Heritage Victoria and Heritage Council commissioned sort of a revisit to that survey that was particularly in Victoria, and we found very similar results and responses from the Victorian community. And we found that overwhelmingly they place a high value on the state's heritage and their local heritage, and support generally stricter regulations, higher penalties, and better enforcement of heritage regulations where needed to protect it. Another reason to protect heritage is because it is a really huge part of that grail, holy grail of the sense of place that planners are often trying to create or enhance. And it is often a very important part of the unique character of our cities, towns, and localities. It also informs community identity and creates a sense of local pride. There's also a growing research base that demonstrates that caring for heritage places and taking part in cultural heritage activities can generate significant environmental, economic, and social benefits. And of course, as I'm sure all the planners here know, identifying and protecting places of local heritage significance is one of municipal council's duties under the Planning and Environment Act. So the question you might be asking is, why did Heritage Council, who generally, as I said, deals with state-level heritage matters, decide to dip its toe in and do a State of Heritage review, which really looks at the local scene, how the heritage overlay is operating, how interactions between state and local government are working, and what's working and what can be improved. So how did this come to be? The first step in this was that the Heritage Council commissioned a feasibility study for a new Victorian heritage strategy. This was back in 2018. And there were 5 really key areas of concern that were identified. And number one, considered the most urgent and the most frequently mentioned, was in relation to local heritage. Also, just in terms of a numbers game, where do we have the most heritage? It's mostly in heritage overlays. So we have approximately 186,000 properties that are protected within local heritage overlays, as opposed to just over 2,300 on the Victorian Heritage Register. So if we want to protect the bulk of Victoria's heritage, we really need to make sure that we're paying attention to the local level as well. Also in 2018, there was quite a bit of press and, I guess, community angst around heritage. So it was a local heritage in particular. And a lot of people from the local areas were coming to Heritage Council and Heritage Victoria to, say, rescue local heritage, which wasn't necessarily our job. But it did give us an idea about the concerns out there. And also Planning Panels Victoria were mentioning that they had a huge amount of their work, about 25%, maybe not huge, but was in relation to planning amendments that were involving the heritage overlay. Another reason is that Heritage Council, beyond its responsibilities to look after state-level places, is that some of our functions and powers under the Heritage Act relate to heritage in a broader sense statewide. And these include things like to advise the Minister for Planning on the status of the state's cultural heritage resources and any steps necessary to protect and conserve them. It also includes to promote public understanding of the state's cultural heritage and to develop and conduct community information and education programs, and also to advise government departments and agencies, municipal councils, and other responsible authorities on matters related to the protection and conservation of cultural heritage. So with these things in mind, Heritage Council commenced a review in late 2018, but we had to, throughout this project, keep in mind that we are not the statutory authority over local heritage. There's some things we can influence and do ourselves, and in some cases it's simply that we are providing advice to those who can do things. So there were 4 main objectives for the State of Heritage Review. At its basis was just to understand what we were dealing with and what problems were out there, was a stock take, so-called, of local heritage protection as it existed in 2019. The scope of heritage overlay coverage, its effectiveness, achievements of various councils in this area, and common problems that we saw across the state or in certain areas. We also wanted to formulate some practical and deliverable improvements to the local heritage system, particularly improving the way that state and local governments work together in this sphere. We wanted to improve understanding of the heritage system by members of the general public, and that includes where the local and state divide is, but more generally as well. And fourthly, we wanted to promote and encourage good heritage practice by showcasing case studies of really great practice by local councils. So, as I said, Heritage Council has statutory authority in some areas, but not others. So we divided the outcomes that we were seeking into 2 streams. And one were sort of big picture strategic initiatives that we would recommend to the Minister for Planning to implement. And the second were practical improvements that Heritage Council itself could drive with key partners. And so how did we gather the information, or shall I say, how did Kale gather the information? It was through surveying all local councils, and by hook and by crook we got responses from every single one, all 79 of them, which was so we have a really representative view in this report. We held workshops. There were 5 workshops in all, 2 of them in regional cities, and they included planners and other representatives from local councils, as well as heritage advisors and people in the community who are involved in heritage conservation. We also carried out, or again, Kale, carried out interviews, one-on-one interviews with planners from from councils where they put in some really interesting information in their survey responses that showed some sort of innovation or doing more with less funding and those sort of things, where he interviewed them and created case studies about what they're doing to serve as, interesting examples for others. And we also, there was also sort of a desktop survey of what other states and territories and countries do in relation to heritage, particularly in relation to the challenges we found. This whole process was guided by a steering committee that had a number of Heritage Council members on it, including myself, as well as representatives from local councils and the MAV and the National Trust. So, to improve our understanding of how the municipalities of different sizes, rate bases, and locations were faring, we broke them into 6 categories for the purposes of comparative analysis. So these were inner, middle, and outer metropolitan councils with 3 categories. There were regional and rural cities that we grouped together because I realize they're not the same, but they tend to be similar in that they're urban areas that are not predominantly rural. There were large rural shires, which we defined as the cutoff as having an population of over 15,000, and those smaller were defined as small rural shires. Included in that number was the Alpine Management Board, which kindly responded, and we didn't want to have a whole new category for them. So having this breakdown of data, I should just mention for those of you who might go away and look at this report, it allows planners to look at how their council is doing in comparison with others that might be in a similar situation and have similar resources. So it's a really great way to benchmark your council and perhaps then take a budget bid and say, hey, look, everybody else in our group is doing much better on this aspect than us. Let's try to improve, or but also to give praise where it's due if you're doing particularly well in your category. So I don't have time to give all of the results of this report. That would be, you'd probably all fall asleep or be starving for lunch. So I thought I would just focus on a few key indicators that came out of the information we found, particularly in relation to rural and regional municipalities. So to start, for example, 73% of all Victorian councils have a heritage advisor. And that's a pretty good number. It's a pretty large majority. But I should point out that we also looked at how things had changed over the prior 3 years. And we found that it had been a decrease in the number of heritage advisors in the 3 prior years from about 89%. And this was a number that had been going down steadily since state government co-funding of heritage advisors had stopped in 2012. And of the 27% of councils that didn't have a heritage advisor, 80% of them are regional or rural. Turning to another question we asked about, heritage studies. And I imagine you all know, but heritage studies are the instrument with which heritage places of local heritage significance are identified and then assessed before implementation into the heritage overlay. And we found that a massive 97% of Victorian councils had completed at least one heritage study. That's actually one council has never done at least a stage 1, which is great. But only 58% of councils had managed to implement their heritage studies, or all of them, yet. And unsurprisingly, 66% of the councils who are behind on their implementation are rural or regional. And we found that the implementation of heritage studies for everybody was a problem, and about 60%, sorry, not everybody, a majority, 60% noted as a particularly difficult area of planning, and noted key stumbling blocks that were particularly of concern for rural and regional councils are things like the costs involved, opposition from property owners, and sometimes a lack of political will amongst the councillors. And looking at this from another angle, we looked at gaps in heritage studies and heritage overlays. And that includes gaps in geographic areas. You know, after amalgamation, there might be a former shire or part of a shire that's never been looked at in a study. There are also typological gaps of the types, you know, the places that are protected in the heritage overlay. So while only 18% of Victorian councils overall identified geographic gaps in their heritage overlay, 80% of those gaps were amongst rural and regional councils. And while a large number of Victorian councils, 76%, identified that there were typological gaps in their heritage overlay, most frequently things like gardens, trees, landscapes, and post-war houses. An even larger, 95% of all large regional councils identified such gaps. So despite the understanding amongst this large group of councils that such gaps exist in their heritage overlay, only 34% of all Victorian councils had carried out a heritage study within the prior 3 years. And looking at the rural regional sector, only 16% of all councils had carried out heritage study recently, and none of the small rural councils had done so. So together, these numbers start to build a picture of serious resourcing issues for heritage in rural and regional municipalities. And I don't think it will come to a surprise to many of you, but I think it's really valuable to have the numbers to back this up and demonstrate these issues. So there are also needs for guidance in heritage planning that was felt by heritage council planners and heritage advisors, both in rural and regional, and in fact across all Victorian councils. This includes the need for the provision of sophisticated advice on complex matters from DELT planning, the need for an up-to-date and comprehensive suite of practice notes and other guidance for heritage, as well as material that can be used to educate council executives, planners, and councillors. The need is especially pronounced at councils that do not have in-house heritage expertise, like a heritage advisor or a dedicated heritage planner. We heard from many council planners who operate in isolation with no prior background in heritage, and they struggle to know what is best practice, where to find the information to figure that out, and how to critique the advice or reports that are provided to them by heritage consultants, whether that be statutory planners or strategic planners who are commissioning work and not sure that it's been done well. So also many of those surveyed noticed a lack of public understanding of the heritage system amongst the general public. What does inclusion in the heritage overlay mean? Does it mean you'll never get that new kitchen, or is it a little bit less dangerous than that? And also, as I noted, a lack of understanding of the division of responsibilities between state and local authorities. Another issue that came through strongly across the state is that heritage is often not well integrated with other aspects of planning. It can be seen as an optional extra, something that'd be nice to have that's thrown in perhaps at the very end of a project. And in those cases, it can be very disruptive and then be seen as a real roadblock to development, as opposed to something very interesting and valuable that could be woven into it from the very beginning. But I should say it's not all doom and gloom. We found that a majority of many councils across the state, 70%, have established at least one mechanism to either celebrate heritage or provide that really necessary information about it. These include things like heritage web pages, brochures, events, awards, tours, newsletters, and interpretive signage. Of course, the distribution of this follows a similar pattern as things I've been talking about before. So we have 97% of metropolitan councils have at least one such mechanism, while 51% of rural and regional councils do. That said, some of the most encouraging and inspiring case studies in our report are about rural and regional councils who've managed some really great outcomes with not necessarily the largest budgets. So I encourage you to look at the report, and there's information about great initiatives and work at places like the Pyrenees Shire, Indigo Shire, Glenelg Shire, Greater Bendigo, and Greater Shepparton rural cities. So, as I said, we decided to, our recommended outcomes are in two groups. By necessity, the strong strategic initiatives require support from the Minister and DELP. And we are looking for the state to take back a really key role in setting direction and expectations for heritage, and facilitate best practice across the state by offering leadership and consistent advice. And this would rest on three pillars as we've defined them. The first would be to have dedicated roles, again, within DELP planning to provide necessary focused leadership and advice on local heritage protection. This might include things like improving the integration of heritage into other aspects of planning, like things like structure planning and urban design, providing consistent direction and advice to councils regarding their local heritage obligations and strategic work, ensuring that there's sufficient guidance, both documents and regular training, which are kept up to date. The second is to create and maintain up-to-date guidance material, storing it in a single, easy-to-access spot, so you know that you're getting the most up-to-date information. And we'd also think people are calling out for the updating and expanding of practice note number 1, applying the heritage overlay, maybe perhaps creating more practice notes about other areas of heritage planning, updating the model consultant's brief for heritage studies, which I think was last done in 2008, and preparing guidance on thresholding for local heritage assessments, as well as perhaps developing a project on minimal documentation that's necessary for heritage studies. And by that I mean being able to narrow down what's really needed to document that a place warrants inclusion in a heritage overlay, but trying to contract it a bit. Our heritage, just because of panels and that sort of thing, heritage consultants tend to sort of do more than they necessarily need to, and that costs more for councils. The third would be to provide direct support where needed to ensure that every single council has translated at least one broad-based, say, blanket heritage study into their planning scheme. This might include some financial assistance, especially for the 4% of councils who have yet to undertake a Stage 2 heritage study. But as I say, these would have to be implemented by DELP, and of course with the cooperation of Heritage Council. And very briefly, we have some recommendations for practical improvements that would be driven by Heritage Council. I won't read them through them all, but just note that we're working on practical improvements 2 and 3 right now, and we'll next start on 1, 5, and 6. So the practical improvement 2 is a Heritage 101 pack for councils and the public. And our local government heritage specialist committee has been working very hard with members of the Secretariat to prepare information, which is going to be forms of posters, brochures that can be handed out, and animations that can go on councils' websites about explaining what is heritage, what are the implications of heritage overlays, why is heritage important for the general public, can be distributed through your channels. Another thing that we're just about finished with is a Heritage 101 pack for councillors, which we're doing in concert with the MAV, and it will be part of the pack that they give to new councillors. This will also come with a template for a PowerPoint presentation that can be used by planners when they want to induct new councillors, and adapt it to, sort of has some general messages, and it can be adapted to your situation. I'll just mention a few things that are coming up that might be of interest. So DELP has just published a new practice note, 95, on the use of the new Section B and Division 2A of the Planning and Environment Act, which is about the new law in terms of demolition by neglect and perhaps requiring rebuilding or limiting future development on those sites. So that's just been put up on their website, and in cooperation with DELP, on, I believe, the 22nd of June. This isn't a firm date yet, but we've earmarked it 2 days ago. There will be a lunchtime webinar where we have a speaker from DELP and a few other speakers talking about how to put this new Section 6B into action. Also, early next year, I don't know, some of you might have attended a few years ago the Local Government Heritage Forum, and we're planning to have one that's live, well, I think with a hybrid live and online. We'll have one of those early next year in 2023. Also rolling out a promotion program to share the messages and information from the State of Heritage Review to the wider public, and that's being scoped right now. Do I have time to mention? I'll just say really quickly, Heritage Council does even more projects than this. We have things you might be interested in. There's a Heritage and Climate Change project, which is 2 stages. So we have online some principles about how to address the effects of climate change on heritage places, which you can find online. And later this year, there will be some published information and case studies. We also do things, there's a really nice guide that we finished last year about renovating heritage houses, which is really for the general public and might be something you want to share with your communities. And we do also technical guides for people like me and things like mortar. So thank you very much for listening, and I really hope that those of you who are interested in heritage and heritage planning take the time to look at this report, because there's so much more information than I've been able to go through today. You can find it, I've given the web link here, but you can easily find it by going to the Heritage Council website and looking in our publications page.